Welcome to another beautiful episode of One Mountain, Many Paths. We're talking about the Avatar movies, and there's so many different characters. I thought it would be helpful. I made a little map here that I want to share with you of all the characters that we have. And even if you've seen the movies, this will be very helpful just to know all the names and see all the faces in one place. So, the main people that I want to go over, this is only the really main characters that we've been talking about. But in the top left here, you have the Sully family, which is all based around the Forest tribe. And the Forest tribe name is the Omitikaya. So you have Jake Sully here as the main character who goes from human to Avatar. That's the whole first movie is his transition there. You have Neytiri, who is the one who first falls in love with Jake, and we talked last week about their intergalactic romance that begins to break the border between Avatar, or to break the border between the people on the planet, the indigenous people, and the humans, and make connection there. Then you have Moak over here, or Moat, who is Natiri's mother, who is the head of, she's like the shaman woman who really runs the forest tribe. And now at this point in movie three, Jake and Neytiri have five children. Not all their children directly, so they have three direct children, one of which who has passed away. Natium, he passed away. Now Loak has a very important arc in this movie. And then you have Took, those are their three direct children. Then you have Kiri, who is the child of one of Jake's very close friends, who is the scientist who really helped create the connection between Jake and the planet Pandora. So she's very important too. And then you have Spider, who is the human child who is kind of raised by Jake and Neytiri. So that's a very important family to understand what's going on here. And we'll talk about all of them in more depth. I don't want to go in too deep to everyone, but I just want to give you this overview. So we have the Water Tribe here, which is that the Forest Tribe team had to leave the Forest Tribe because Spider was being tracked and hunted, and so was Jake Sully. So they wanted to get away from their home family and go somewhere safe. And that was with the Water Tribe here. So you have Tonawari and Ronal, who are the two heads of the clan. And then you have two of their children. They have more children too, but these two have a very important arc in this movie. You have Tsureya and you have Onung, and these two, yes, also have big arcs here. Then, very important is the human military who are coming in and trying to destroy and extract from the planet. You have Quaritch. Now, Quaritch, the important thing to know is that Quaritch is actually Spider's father. Now, Quaritch was in a human body and has now also been transitioned into an avatar body. And now he also has a very interesting arc about becoming an avatar and what that's like. Then you have General Francis, who's the one who's really leading the whole military and just doesn't really care, is kind of a jerk. And yeah, but she doesn't have too big of an arc, but she's a good character to know about. Then with this movie, you have the introduction of a new tribe called the Ash tribe, or they're called the Menquan clan. And the main character there is Varong, and she is like the leader of the tribe. And then a couple more characters to really keep in mind. There is the Tolkun, which is the whale tribe. These are sentient whales who have culture, history, philosophy. And the main character from that is Peakan, who is very close with Loak. So they have a very deep connection too. They're like soul brothers. And then you have the matriarch and the whole crew of the elder whales who are helping to come to deep decisions about how to move forward. Of course, you have some non-military humans. This guy, Captain Mick Scrobsby, is the guy who leads the extraction of killing the whales and or killing the Tolkun. These people over here, and extracting they have like this liquid inside of them that apparently makes humans live a long time. So this guy's kind of a jerk, likes to make a lot of money. And then you have a scientist, Dr. Ian Garvin, who's a very good human on the inside, who's trying to protect the Tolkien and feels weird the whole time as he's on a boat with this man and is trying to save the day. And then finally, you have Awa, which is the goddess, the Pandora innate intelligence that is creating everything, who most characters have a deep connection with. All of these people have deep respect for Awa. However, Varang and her tribe have turned away from Awa and do not believe and do not show respect to Awa. So that's also important to know. Same with Colonel Miles Quaritch here, and of course, all the humans who don't really care about the intelligence of the planet. So yeah, that's just a quick overview because I thought it was helpful. Yeah, again, Mark, if you want to refer to this at any point throughout, please do. And please enjoy this teaching with Dr. Marc Gafni.
Thank you. Eli, thank you so much. Right. And thank you so much for that. Just kind of, it's great to have for everybody to have the map. Super good. It's also super important to, see the movie. Actually, all three movies are one structure and culture, right? It is, either number one or number two in terms of the all-time, box office record, which means that it is striking a resonant chord in culture. It's saying something that's important, and not necessarily, as we said last week, consciously. I'd say even most of it's not fully articulate in the mind of the 4 or 5 writers, Cameron and his team. There's a bunch of really good people with him, but it is a moment of she, right? Of the movement of Eros itself, articulating through the word, right? Articulating through the davar, the word, the logos, right? That is reality calling us to the plot lines of the story that we're living in. Now, Eli, my friend Eli, we have an agreement that I get to make fun of him a little bit at the end, at the beginning of One Mountain. So we're playing, right? So he's completely aware that I'm playing with him. So, but he's very polite. He says, like, enjoy, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really good, right? He's a happy guy, right? And he's right. We should be like ecstatic to be alive. And it's the most serious engagement you can possibly imagine, right? And we're here not to engage in a form of wisdotainment, right? Which is a kind of superficial enjoyment. We're here to articulate a new story of value, right? In response to the meta crisis, knowing that only such a new story of value, only being able to generate a new reality from within a new story of value, has the capacity to respond to the meta crisis. And to get that new story of value clear, we need to get it all clear. We need a large story in which every piece is profoundly developed, but not made up. We're not declaring it, right? We're not making it up. We have to actually, now stay with me, we have to cut through the thicket of complexity to actually find our way to a second simplicity, not a first simplicity, but a second simplicity, a simplicity after the complexity. And for those of you who will be with us, and you can still register, someone can put a link in the chat box, right? We're on the week 2 of my part of the teaching in this 3-week course on the pre-tragic, tragic, and the post-tragic, which is one of the most fundamental structures of reality that exists that I've been trying to talk about for the last 20 years. It's one of the key dharmic structures of cosmorotic humanism, that there are 3 stations, that reality comes in threes. She comes in threes. And I worked with, with Talia on putting out a book. Talia was the beautiful editor of it, on She Comes in Threes. And Kirsten, you and I have worked on this topic for many, many years. Reality is trialectical. She comes in threes. It starts with pre-tragic, goes to tragic, goes to post-tragic. Understanding how that works changes your life. It applies to 50 domains. One expression of it is simplicity, complexity, second simplicity. So we're looking for second simplicity. We're looking to tell a new story of value that we can scale across the world, but not only across the world, and this takes us into Avatar, but across the galaxy, right? As we're interested in scaling across the galaxy. Now, in order to scale across the galaxy, you have to pay attention to every detail. You have to actually step into, multiple vectors, probably 15, 20 major vectors you have to work out. And about 10 of them it's not cracked. In other words, there's just, you know, 5 opinions, 5 ways of talking about something. But the hard work, stay with me, the hard work of creating coherence, of creating resonance, which is what a story needs. The story has to resonate in the depth of our bodies, and our bodies participate in the body of life. So our human bodies, our noos, our body, heart, mind, our soma, with me, participates in the biosphere, the body of life, right? The great field of life. And then the field of life participates, right, in matter itself. And matter itself is alive. Quite literally, matter is alive. Matter is in some sense living. The split between the animate and the inanimate is ultimately a false split. Ultimately, there's some version of sentience. There's some version of liveness all the way up and all the way down. Matter self-organizes. Matter moves into autocatalytic cycles. Matter already is coded with some sense of value, some sense of aliveness, some sense of, you know, and I would say, I would use a word, let me use this word. I've used the word often, pan-interiority. And Lena, you know, you and I have talked about pan-interiority. I want to add a term that I've been writing about the last couple of weeks, right? In other words, we live in a world which is, there's a pan-interiority. There's some level of interiors all the way up and all the way down. And there's also what I'm going to call it pan-valuism, right? There's value, right? It's value. Value is not hard to find. Value is impossible to avoid. And value is an expression of a living quality of reality, right? Now, when I say a living quality, you know, I don't mean that you can put the word uniqueness on paper. So let's say uniqueness is a value and then go out with that piece of paper. That's not what we mean, right? I don't mean that, you know, you should marry a rock, right? Right? It's not what we mean either. Although the rock is made up of chemical structures, right? Valences of electrons, right? Molecular, it's filled with molecular value, right? It is actually vibrating. It's composed of, right, you know, waves and interference waves, etc. Right? Nonetheless, right, the thing that's called a rock, right, has some proto interiority and has some proto value. That's why a rock evokes a reaction in us. You look at a beautiful rock, you're like, wow. So the rock evokes, you look at the Grand Canyon in the United States, the rock evokes something in us, right? And so you might say, oh my God, he's an animist. Of course I'm an animist, but not a retrojective, not a regressive animist. Animist means it's all alive, right? No, an animism which says that there's a distribution of value and interiority in the whole cosmos, and there's gradual emergences. And as Stuart Kaufman says, all of physics can't predict or determine life. Life is a new emergent, right, which is rooted in, right, the quantum law, but actually can't be predicted by the quantum law, is radically novel and emergent, right? So we're telling this new story of value in which we're going to bring everything together. So when we come to Avatar, we're not here for like, oh, let's do a little Avatar wisdotainment thing. Fuck you. I don't want to do that. That's boring. That's not interesting. No. We want to see how the plot lines of Cosmos play in Avatar, how the first principles and first values that make up, right, the cosmoerotic universe are at play in Avatar. That's what we want to see. And then we want this activity that we're going to do for these next, you know, minutes to be part of our writing this new story of value in response to the meta crisis. Does that make sense, everyone? Who's got that? Who did that make sense to? Does that make sense to anyone here? So we want to go into Avatar from that perspective, and I just want to show you something crazy for a second, okay? Just so you get a sense of, right, like, what are we doing here together? We're here telling this new story of value. So, and sometimes you get thinking to think about temporality, which is time. And I've thought about time. I've taught about time. I've written a chapter about time, but I haven't thought about it in a while. And I realized, you know, I need to think about it again in terms of, right, the work we're doing around this new story of value and how a story happens, because a story happens in time. So in order to think about time, you've got to go like all over the world, right? There's a lot to think about. So I would say without hyperbole, like this is no hyperbole here, no hyperbole, right? In this time between worlds and time between stories. And when we say time between worlds and time between stories, we're thinking about time. Does that make sense? Time. It's about time. So to think about it, you've got to go very deep into physics. You got to go very deep into biology in a different way. You have to go very, very deep into kind of all sorts of things, right? It's a very, very deep ride. I've been, I spent a couple $100 to buy the book of the original debate between Bergson and Einstein, right? About time, which took place in 1922. And so I would say, literally without hyperbole, no hyperbole, I would say I've got about 500 pages of notes, 600 pages of notes on my desk, kind of various kinds about time. And I'm dying to write. There's like 3 pieces that need to be written, right? One's a longer essay on temporality, and the other is just a short, how long, Lena? I don't know, a few thousand words, 4,000 words, right? For our essay on story as a structure of reality. And it also affects one of our elements of story, which is called telos, right? But I can't write it. I can't write it because it's not quite worked out. And we've got to get this new story of value all the way. And I've got like 3 more steps I'm trying to work out. And most of what I work out, right, I'm probably bleeding now. And most of what I work out, right, will, of course, not be in the essay, but there's an integrity in writing, right? There's an integrity in writing where we've got to break through. Right. So we had to break through on value theory. We had to break through on self theory. We had to break through on universe story. Right. And so if we don't break through, we can't we got to go that far. That's what we're doing. And we're populist, but not popular. Does everyone get what I mean by that? We're populist, meaning we care about actually people. And we are, this great response to suffering. And so we're not involved in kind of cognition per se, right? We're not involved, right, in intellect per se, right? Although intellect and cognition are obviously part of the story, but we're feeling, and we're feeling suffering. And we're knowing that literally today, friends, I just want you to get this. Literally, you can't have a conversation today. You literally can't have a conversation with almost anyone, because people literally lack core distinctions, but not just because they lack them, because the distinctions haven't been made, because philosophy stopped, right? Because value theory stopped. Does everyone get that? Value theory just stopped. It just stopped, right? In any number, right? The integration of the humanities and the STEM fields stopped, right? In so many different areas, the development of thought itself just utterly stopped. And so what we're doing is, at the center, myself, and all of us, involved in different ways, and a key partner, Zach Stein and Ken Wilber. We just had a beautiful conversation with Ian McGilchrist. It's maybe the 3rd conversation we've had, but we're talking to different people in different places. But at the core, we're trying to weave together and to break through. Okay, to break through. So that's what we're trying to do. So and it's a big decision when we talk about Avatar. If you're new, if you haven't been here before, we're not talking about Avatar as kind of like, hey, have a nice time. Let's do this really cool interpretation of Avatar. Although we want to do a really cool interpretation of Avatar this week and next week, right? But we're looking at Avatar to see what is culture still remember. What are the intuitions of culture that are important, that are still there, that we can actually build on because they're still resonant, but it's not enough to tell the story in a movie. So, and again, as important as Avatar is, I just want to say this clearly, unless we go into Avatar, which is essentially a broken vessel, and in that broken vessel, there are sparks of light. And unless we liberate the sparks of light from the broken vessel, Avatar remains a blockbuster hit that gave some people a good feeling, but is actually not grounded, right, in a field of value, not articulated, not coherent, and remains a movie. It will not shape culture. It will not avoid suffering, right? It will not it will not transform reality. It will not save the future. It will not help us avoid the death of our humanity and the death of humanity. Even though it says very important things, because they're not worked out and because they're sparks of light in broken vessels. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're actually engaging in the act of liberating the sparks of light from the broken vessels, and then weaving those sparks of light together, right, into a larger fire. Does that make sense? Does everyone get that? That's literally what we're doing. We're going into the broken vessels, liberating the sparks of light, weaving the sparks of light together in a larger configuration of light, right, to actually light a larger fire. Yes? Does that make sense to everyone? So even more important than anything we're about to say about Avatar is to contextualize this conversation. What are we doing here?